Under the dim lights of Starbound Academy, the night halls were silent, except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Mark Ellison pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the long corridor, his shoes making the faintest squeak against the polished floor. He was used to the stillness of these late hours where no voices echoed and no one crossed his path. But tonight there was something different in the air, something heavier. He'd worked here for years and knew every creak, every hum, every faint mechanical sigh of the building. That was why the sound stopped him. It wasn't a usual sound. It was faint, like the scratching of tiny claws against wood, then a soft, almost pitiful whimper. He froze his mop in hand, listening. The sound came. Again, from somewhere ahead, Mark's eyes drifted to the end of the hall where a heavy metal door sat shut. Its frame was dustier than the others. No one ever used that room. He remembered being told during his first week that this was part of the old storage wing sealed off years ago. No reason was ever given, just a warning that it wasn't his concern and he should keep out. But the sound was definitely coming from behind. Heath set his mop against the wall and walked toward the door. His steps were careful, quiet. The scratching stopped when he got close, replaced by a tiny, uneven breath. He rested his hand on the cold metal knob, and for a moment he hesitated. The rule was clear: stay out. But something about that fragile sound pushed him to turn the knob slowly. The door gave a soft groan as it opened, letting out a stale smell of dust and something else.
Ice.
A faint scent like smoke and earth. The room inside was dark, lit only by a thin strip of moonlight from a high window. Dust floated in the beam like tiny silver specks. He stepped in, and the air felt heavier. His eyes adjusted to the gloom, and that was when he saw her. In the far corner, curled into herself, was a small creature unlike anything he had ever seen. Her body was covered in fine scales that shimmered faintly in the moonlight, shifting between shades of pale gold and silver. Her wings were tucked tightly against her sides, as if she was trying to make herself as small as possible. Her head lifted just slightly at the sound of his step, and two enormous eyes locked onto his. Mark felt his breath catch. She was no animal from Earth, that much was certain. The eyes were too intelligent, the movements too deliberate. She didn't make a sound, but her mouth opened just a little, her throat moving as though she were trying to speak. He crouched slowly, keeping his hands open in front of him. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure she could understand. The creature didn't back away, but she didn't come closer either. She just stared, her eyes following every small movement he made. He glanced at her feet, delicate claws tapping nervously against the stone floor. A faint tremor ran through her body. She looked hungry. Thin and frightened, he reached into his cart where he kept a few wrapped snacks for long shifts. After unwrapping one, he held it out. His hand trembled slightly as he extended it toward her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Her gaze flicked between his face and the food, then very slowly, she inched forward, each movement cautious. Her claws clicked softly on the stone floor. Her nose came close enough to smell the food, but then her eyes darted upward past his shoulder, and her entire body went rigid. Mark frowned, glancing behind him, but saw nothing, just the doorway standing open to the hall. He turned back to her and noticed she was trembling. Her gaze stayed locked on that same spot above him, as though she saw something he couldn't. Her throat moved again, like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. It was strange, unsettling. Set the food on the floor between them and pulled his hand back. She didn't touch it at first, instead keeping her eyes fixed on that point above him. Finally, she looked down, sniffed the food, and with one quick motion, snatched it in her teeth. She backed away to the corner again, curling around the small snack and nibbling at. Mark sat on the floor watching her quietly. He could hear the faint sound of her chewing, soft and careful. Then he thought he heard something else, the almost inaudible creak of the floorboards above the storage room. The sound was so slight he could have imagined it, but the way the dragonling's ears twitched told him she heard it too. He told himself it was nothing, maybe the building settling. But still a small prickling sensation crawled up the back of his neck. He stayed there for a few minutes, just watching her and listening. The room was so still. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. When she finished eating, she looked at him again. The fear in her eyes had softened, just slightly replaced with something closer to curiosity. He smiled gently, though his heart was still beating faster than normal. You're not supposed to be here, he said softly, though he knew that was the least important truth in the room. He stood slowly, not wanting to scare her, and stepped back toward the door. She didn't move to follow, but her gaze stayed fixed on him until he stepped out into the hallway. The moment he crossed the threshold, the strange heavy feeling in the air seemed to lift slightly. He looked back once at the open door, and for a moment thought he saw movement. In the shadows high in the corner of the room, something tall, something watching. Then the light flickered in the hall, breaking his focus. He shut the door gently and moved his cart back down the corridor, but the image of her stayed with him. The silent little creature with eyes that seemed to hold whole worlds, and that strange sense that he and she had not been alone in. That room, not for 1 second that night as he walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights seemed dimmer. The wind carried a faint smell of smoke, though there were no fires nearby. He told himself he would forget about the room, forget about the creature. But deep down he knew he wouldn't. Tomorrow night, he would go back, because whatever she was, she was. Alone and scared, and someone or something had been there watching them, and that was not something he could ignore, under the pale glow of the Academy's emergency lights. The hallways felt emptier than usual. Mark Ellison pushed his cleaning cart down the same path he always took, but his mind wasn't on the floors or the trash bins. It was on the tiny dragonling he had seen the night before. Her eyes, the way her throat had moved as if trying to speak, and the way she had frozen staring into the shadows above him, all of it had stayed with him through the night. He had promised himself he would forget, but he knew that was a lie. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those shimmering scales and those wide, silent eyes. So here he was again, walking toward the forbidden storage wing. His steps slowed when he reached the heavy metal door. He listened for the same scratching sound, but heard nothing. The silence made him hesitate. Maybe she was gone. Maybe she had only been hiding there for a night still. His hand moved to the cold knob. He turned it slowly and opened the door. A faint scent of dust and smoke greeted him again. The moonlight fell through the high window, painting a silver patch on the floor. And there she was, curled tightly in the same corner. She looked thinner than before. Her wings twitched slightly as she lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and she didn't shrink back this time. She simply watched him. He stepped inside, slowly, keeping his movements calm as he set a small cloth bundle on the floor. He had brought food again, fresh fruit and a piece of bread. She didn't move toward it right away. Instead, she tilted her head and gave a soft, chuffing breath, almost like a sigh. Mark crouched down, opening the bundle and showing her the food. He made a soft, encouraging sound and tapped the bread lightly with his finger. Her gaze flicked between his face and the food before she shuffled forward. Her claws clicked lightly on the stone. She took the bread first, biting it in small, careful pieces. Mark smiled. "That's it. You're safe here." She paused mid-bite, staring at his lips as if studying the shape of the words. Then her mouth moved in a strange, awkward way. Her throat made a faint, raspy sound, but no clear word. Mark froze, then slowly spoke again. Bread. His voice was calm, steady. She tried again. The sound she made was still broken, but closer to a word. He nodded, encouraging her. His heart raced at the thought that she was actually trying to copy him. Then her gaze suddenly shifted again to the shadows above them. Her body stiffened. The bread slipped from her claws to the floor. Mark followed her gaze, but saw nothing, only darkness high in the rafters. He listened closely. For a moment he thought he heard something faint, almost like breathing, but too deep, too slow to be human. He swallowed hard, turning back to her. She was still staring up, unmoving. Mark forced a smile. "It's okay," he said quietly, but the words felt thin and hollow. He didn't believe them himself. The dragonling finally tore her gaze away and picked up the bread again. She ate more quickly now, as though she wanted to finish before something happened. Mark didn't push her. He just sat there, trying to shake the feeling that they were being observed. The same prickling sensation from last night crept across his skin. When she finished eating, she crept a little closer to him, just a step, but it felt like trust. She looked up at him with those deep golden eyes. Her mouth moved again, a soft sound escaping, almost like a hum. It wasn't a word, but it was the first time her voice had carried something warmer. Less afraid. Mark wanted to stay longer, but the unease in the air wouldn't let him. He backed toward the door slowly. She stayed where she was, but her eyes followed him all the way out as he closed the door. He thought he saw movement in the shadows high above, again a flicker of gold-like eyes catching the light walking back down the hallway. Mark's mind swirled with questions. Who was watching them? Why was she silent? Why did she only try to speak with him? He didn't know the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He would be back tomorrow, and maybe then he would get closer to the truth. Next night, the halls of Starbound Academy seemed even quieter than usual, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Mark Ellison rolled his cleaning cart along his usual route, but his eyes kept drifting to the far end of the corridor, where the old storage wing waited. The janitor's keys jingled softly at his side, but his hands felt tense. He wasn't just here to clean tonight. He was here to see if the little dragonling would trust him a little more. When he reached the heavy metal door, he stopped and listened. The faint smell of smoke and earth seemed to seep from behind it. Even before he opened it slowly, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The stale, dusty air greeted him again, along with the pale moonlight from the high window. The dragonling was there in the same corner, but this time she lifted her head. The moment she saw him, her eyes seemed brighter, more alert. Mark stepped inside and sat on the floor, keeping his movements slow. He reached into his bag and pulled out something different tonight. A small wooden board on which he had drawn simple shapes, circles, squares, triangles, and a picture of bread and an apple. He had also brought actual pieces of bread and fruit to match. He placed the bread on the board next to its drawing and tapped the picture with his finger. "Bread," he said clearly and calmly. His voice echoed softly in the empty room. The dragonling tilted her head, eyes fixed on his mouth. He repeated the word slowly, "bread." Her throat moved slightly. She made a faint clicking sound, but no word yet. He picked up the bread and offered it to her. She hesitated, then took it gently from his hand. Chewing slowly, he smiled again, tapping the drawing once more. "Bread," he said again. This time she made a sound closer to the right shape of the word. Her voice was soft, raspy, but it was almost there. Mark's heart skipped. She was trying. They went through the shapes again. He pointed at the apple. Her attempt at the sound was rough, but it made him grin. She was learning faster than he expected. Just when he was about to praise her, she froze. Her eyes shot upward, toward the rafters above. A deep, low sound rolled through the air, not from her, but from somewhere higher. It wasn't loud, but it had weight to it, like the growl of something huge. Mark's skin prickled. He glanced up, but saw only darkness. The moonlight didn't reach that high. The dragonling didn't look afraid this time, though. Gaze stayed fixed on the shadows, as if she knew exactly what was there. Mark's breath quickened. He wanted to ask her what she saw, but the words stuck in his throat. Finally, her eyes came back to his, and she did something that made his pulse jump. She said his name. It wasn't perfect. The R was soft, the K barely there, but it was clear enough. Mark, his name in her voice felt strange and fragile, like glass about to break. He couldn't help but smile. "You said my name for." A few moments, the strange tension in the room faded. Replaced by something warmer, she took a small step toward him, still watching his face, as if waiting for approval. "You did good," he said softly, almost in a whisper. But then, from above came the faint creak of wood, a shift like something moving its weight. The warmth in Mark's chest cooled instantly. He looked up again, and for the briefest second thought, he saw two golden glints far above. Before they vanished into the dark, he ended the lesson early that night. His mind wasn't ready to deal with whatever was up there still. As he left, he looked back once and saw her standing in the moonlight holding the bread close, watching him go. Her silent eyes followed him until the door closed between them and Dot. Even as he walked away, he could still feel the weight of her gaze and the presence of whatever else had been watching that night. Mark Ellison told himself he would only do his regular shift, clean the halls, empty the bins, and go home. But as he moved his cart along the silent corridors, his thoughts kept drifting back to the dragonling and the strange, heavy feeling that always filled that storage room. No matter how much he tried to focus on his work, his feet carried him toward the old forbidden door once again. The academy was quieter than usual. The humming of the vents felt louder every step, echoing faintly in the long hall. When he reached the door, he paused. His hand hovered over the knob, listening. The building seemed still too still. He opened the door slowly, the hinges whispering in the silence. The same stale smell greeted him along with the faint smoky scent. That he now associated with her, the dragonling, was there in her corner, but she looked different tonight. Her head was high, her wings half unfurled as if she had been waiting for him. The moonlight poured down over her scales, making them glimmer. In silver and gold, Mark smiled softly and sat on the floor across from her. He took out the wooden board with drawings again, and some food. She stepped forward more quickly than before, curiosity replacing her earlier caution. They went over the shapes. And words again, her attempts were better, clearer. Each time she tried, he nodded and repeated the sound, encouraging her. She even said his name again, and this time it was almost perfect, but halfway through the lesson, she stopped, her eyes locked on. The rafters above her pupils, narrowing her entire body, went still. Mark froze to following her gaze. That was when he saw them for the first time, two golden eyes in the darkness, far above, unmoving, unblinking. They glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight. Like polished metal, Mark's heart pounded. He couldn't look away. Those eyes were too high to belong to anything small, and they were watching him, not the dragonling watching and waiting. He forced himself to speak. "Who's there?" His voice came. Out quieter than he meant. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. Then a slow, deep sound like a growl rolled through the room. Vibrating faintly in his chest, it was low enough that it felt more like a presence than a noise. The dragonling didn't seem frightened. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her small claws clicking softly on the stone. Her gaze flicked between him and the shadows above, almost as if she were reassuring him. Mark's breath quickened. He wanted to stand, but his body stayed rooted to the spot. He couldn't shake the feeling that moving too fast would be a mistake. Finally, he looked down at her. She tilted her head toward him and gave the faintest hum before turning her gaze back upward. When Mark glanced up again, the eyes were gone, the rafters were empty, swallowed by darkness. He stayed there for several minutes, scanning the shadows, but nothing moved. The air still felt heavy, as if the room itself was holding something unseen. Eventually, he forced himself to pack up the board and stand. The dragonling didn't follow him, but her gaze never left his face. As he reached the door, he glanced back one last time. Thought he saw the faintest shimmer in the corner, high above where the eyes had been then. The door closed, and the hallway felt both safer and lonelier walking away. Mark knew the watcher was real. The golden eyes had been no trick of the light. And whoever or whatever they belonged to was not done with him yet. Mark Ellison walked into the academy that night with his chest tight and his thoughts restless. The golden eyes he had seen in the rafters would not leave his mind. He had gone over it 100 times in his head, convincing himself it was a trick of the light, then just as quickly convincing himself it wasn't. The truth was simple and impossible at the same time. Something had been in that room watching them, and it was big. Corridors were still, as always, the quiet pressing in around him. He rolled his cleaning cart slowly down the hall, every shadow seeming darker than usual. When he reached the forbidden door, his hand paused over the knob. A small voice in his head told him to leave it shut, but his curiosity drowned it out. He turned the knob and stepped. Inside, the dragonling was waiting for him, standing instead of curled up in the corner. Her scales shimmered faintly in the moonlight from the high window. She stepped forward the moment she saw him, no longer hesitant. He crouched and set down the food he had brought, fruit, bread, and a small jug of water. As she ate, he pulled out the board with the drawings again. Tonight he wanted to try something more. He pointed to the bread. He said slowly. She looked at his mouth, then back at the bread. Her throat moved, and the sound came out almost perfect. Bread. Mark grinned. That's right. He tried again with apple. She copied him, not perfectly, but close enough to make him nod with pride. Then, without warning, she stopped mid-bite. Her body stiffened. Her golden eyes locked on his, and for the first time she spoke a full, clear sentence in perfect English. Her voice was soft, but each word was sharp and certain. "She is coming for youth." Bread slipped from his fingers. His heart thudded once hard. In his chest, he leaned closer, trying to make sense of what she had said. She didn't repeat herself. Instead, her gaze shifted slowly toward the doorway behind him. A deep, heavy thud shook the hall outside the room, followed by another, then another, like footsteps far too large to belong to a human. The air seemed to grow thicker with each one. The dragonling didn't move, but her tail curled tightly around. Her legs, her eyes stayed on the door Mark, stood slowly, his ears straining. The footsteps stopped just beyond the door. Silence pressed in heavy enough to make his skin crawl. He could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. Then from the other side of the door came a slow, dragging sound, like claws scraping against stone. Looked down at her, expecting fear, but her expression was calm, almost certain. She didn't look away from the door, as if she knew exactly who was there. Mark's throat went dry. He took a small step back from the entrance. The scraping sound stopped, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. The air in the room was so still that even breathing seemed too loud then. Without any sound of retreat, whatever had been outside was gone. The tension in the dragonling's body eased slightly. She picked up the bread again and began to eat, as if nothing had happened. Mark, however, could not shake the words she had spoken. "She is coming for you." The meaning rolled over in his mind again and again. The watcher in the shadows, the golden eyes, the heavy footsteps. They were all connected, and now he knew they were coming closer. When he left the room that night, the hallway outside felt colder. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper. He didn't look back at the door. He was certain that if he did, he might see those golden eyes again, this time much closer than before. Mark Ellison didn't remember much of the day leading up to his shift. His mind kept replaying the moment the dragonling had spoken to him in perfect English. "She is coming for you." The words had sunk deep into his thoughts and stayed there like a hook. He wanted to believe he had imagined it, but he knew better. The clarity in her voice had been too sharp to deliberate. He entered Starbound Academy that night. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the building itself knew what was coming. The long corridor stretched out in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the vents. His footsteps echoed faintly, and each one seemed to pull him toward the storage wing despite every instinct telling him to stay away. He reached the heavy metal door and stood there for several seconds listening. The smell of smoke and earth leaked faintly through the gap around the frame. He turned the knob slowly. The door creaked open and the moonlight from the high window spilled across the floor. The dragonling was not in her usual corner this time. She stood in the center of the room, her head tilted slightly as if she had been expecting him. Mark stepped inside and shut the door behind him. His heart thudded faster with each step toward her. She moved closer, without hesitation, her small claws clicking softly on the stone. Her golden eyes never left his face. Before he could speak, the air in the room seemed to change. A faint vibration rolled through the floor beneath his feet, so subtle he almost thought he imagined it. Then came the sound. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, from somewhere deep within the academy. Each one sent a faint tremor up his legs. Dragonling turned her head toward the door. Her wings shifted slightly, but she didn't look frightened. Instead, she looked calm, prepared. Mark's mouth went dry. "What's happening?" he whispered. Then he heard it. A low rumbling growl that wasn't just sound, it was pressure, heat, presence. It seemed to fill the room without coming from any single direction. The dragonling looked up toward the rafters, and for a moment Mark followed her gaze, expecting to see those golden eyes again, but instead a vast shadow moved across the far wall, stretching long and sharp like the silhouette of wings. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Mark's breath caught in his throat, then without warning, the metal frame of the doorway groaned as something large pressed against it. A voice unlike any he had ever heard slid into the room, calm, deep, and heavy with power. "Mark Ellison." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't even loud, but it carried weight, as if the air itself bent to make way for it. The sound of his name spoken like that made every instinct in him scream to run, but his legs refused to move. The dragonling stepped closer to him, her gaze still fixed on the door. The voice came again, softer this time, but no less commanding. "You have been watched." Mark could barely breathe. He glanced down at the dragonling. Her expression didn't change. Her tail curled around his ankle in what felt almost like reassurance. Then the pressure in the air eased just slightly, and the footsteps began again. This time moving away. The sound faded slowly until the silence returned. The heaviness in the room lifted. Though not completely, Mark felt like the walls still remembered the voice just as clearly as he did. He looked down at her, and for the first time, it felt as if she was the one in control, not him. She blinked slowly and finally spoke again in her soft rasp. Mother, the word echoed in his mind even as he backed toward the door. His hands were shaking as he opened it. The corridor outside was empty, but every shadow seemed alive watching waiting Mark Ellison walked through the academies. Corridors that night, as if stepping into the final chapter of a story he didn't understand. His thoughts spun with the Dragonling's last word. Mother, the watcher in the rafters, the voice at the door, the golden eyes, everything pointed to the same truth. Whoever had been watching them was not just another dragonette, was her mother. When he reached the heavy door to the storage wing, he hesitated. His palm hovered over the knob. His instinct screamed at him to turn around and walk away. But something in him needed answers. He turned the knob and stepped inside. The Dragonling stood in the center of the room, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Her wings twitched faintly in the moonlight, her golden eyes locked onto his, and she took a slow step toward him. Mark's chest tightened. He could hear his own breathing loud in the silence. Then the room grew heavy again. The air thickened with heat and weight, and the faint scent of smoke deepened the sound. Came those slow, heavy footsteps that shook the floor. They weren't down the hall this time. They were in the hall outside and moving straight toward the door. Mark's throat went dry. He didn't move. The Dragonling didn't move either. She simply looked at the door with the calmness of someone who had been expecting this all along. The footsteps stopped. The door groaned, as if pressed by something massive. Then the voice came again, deep and steady. Mark Ellison. Hearing his name like that made his heart slam against his ribs. The Dragonling stepped back slightly, giving him space as the door swung open on its own. She filled the doorway so completely that for a moment Mark's mind couldn't take in her size. Gleaming scales of deep bronze and gold curved over a body built like living armor. Her wings were folded but still scraped faintly against the frame. Her eyes, those same golden eyes from the rafters, locked onto him with an unblinking stare. "You taught my child to speak." She said the words were not a question. Her voice was smoother now, but every syllable vibrated through him like thunder. "I have watched you since the first night." Mark's legs wanted to buckle, but he stayed standing. "Why?" He managed to whisper. "To see if you could be trusted," she replied. Her gaze flicked to the Dragonling, who stepped forward toward her. "She will be the bridge between our kind and yours, but only if you remain." Mark's stomach tightened. "Remain." "You will come with us," she said simply. "If you refuse, you will forget all of this. The choice is yours now." The Dragonling looked at him, eyes wide in a way that made her seem smaller again. Her tail twitched nervously against the floor. The room felt impossibly quiet as he stood there between them, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought of the first night when she had curled in the corner, afraid and silent. He thought of the first bread she had taken from his hand, the first broken word, the way she had finally said his name. He thought of those golden eyes, always watching, always measuring. His mouth was dry, his hands shook, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I'll come." The mother dragon's gaze held his for a long moment, then she stepped aside, revealing the shadowed corridor beyond. The Dragonling moved to his side, brushing her scales lightly against his arm. As they walked toward the dark unknown beyond the door, Mark felt the weight of the academy fall away behind him. The sound of the mother's footsteps echoed ahead of them, slow and certain. And he knew that whatever waited for him was far bigger than anything he had ever imagined.